It's really, really time to challenge the norms. And we have lined up very, very influential women. And of course, the gentleman here, my colleague Victor, who will, of course, help us to provide some insights on how we can navigate the issues. Let me begin with the introductions. And we have Dr. Adedayo Benjamin Lani, who is the Mandate Secretary, FCT Women and Children Secretariat. And she's right here with us. Once again, thank you, Doctor, for joining us.
Pleasure being here. Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
And we also have Dr. Dail Plangsang, and she's, I think, Victor, you will have that introduction. Let me quickly introduce Dr. Asmao Benzi Leo, Gender and Development Expert, and she's also the Executive Director, Center for Nonviolence and Gender Advocacy in Nigeria. Thank you very much, Dr. Smart, for joining us.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here. Good morning, Nigerians.
And as already hinted by Claire, we also have joining us Dr. Dail Plangsat, a gender specialist and policy and development analyst. She is the immediate past director of the Center for Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Jos, and currently the Deputy Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Jos. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
And ladies, thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning. And gender-based violence is a common, challenge that, many women all over the world, not just in Nigeria, face. But according to international organizations, the rate at which, we see more and more women, experience violence, one violence or the other, is becoming quite a concern, not just for government, but of course for global community. And let me start with Dr. Adedayo. Let's articulate when we talk about gender violence, let's quickly articulate, the very prominent ones, that most Nigerian women experience.
Well, I believe the baseline, first of all, is to understand that when we talk about gender-based violence, more prevalent than any other gender, because this is a full spectrum. Yeah. We're talking about violence against humanity, human to human engagement, but more the prevalence is with the woman, with the girl child. And that implicated demographic is what has given this subject as a global conversation, the global call to action, such a principal focus on women and the girl child. And when you're able to take it as a referenced narrative from the place of female genital mutilation, you look at the fact that the issues relating, mutilating, violating the dignity of a woman from the place of her first presentation in girlhood, in the name of a cultural practice, a traditional intervention. It wasn't set up to do evil. It was actually set up socially, traditionally, to bring what to the understanding of the cultural traditional society was a certain moral challenge with raising a girl child and keeping her virtuous, and in her virtue also being able to repress any sexual urge that could not be properly managed, directed, and therefore would bring her to promiscuity, which would implicate the family name because of a daughter, never minding that the son also, with his own challenge, circumcision is not female genital mutilation. The taking away of a foreskin is not the same as going to invasively tamper with the biological presentation of a woman in the place of her feminine genitals. It's about pleasure, yes, in the place of her sexuality. But all of these, it's a mindset thing not a traditional incision that helps a girl to be trained up into a virtuous woman. Let me put it like that.
I need you to clarify
And-
that circumcision bit. You just emphasize.
What do you want
Yes,
me to clarify? No, you see,
so
because-
that
okay.
it's clear that genital mutilation
It's
is not the
female,
same
it's
thing
not the same
as
thing.
circumcision.
I'm a mother of
Yes.
sons
Yes.
and a mother
Yes.
of
Girls.
one daughter. The circumcisions that were done for my son, for my 3 sons, right, is part of our own culture, because in certain cultures of the world, they don't do circumcision. But all that is the removal of a foreskin, and it doesn't do anything to affect. In fact, it is supposed to enhance the pleasure of my son growing into a man and coming into his sexuality.
Not sure that's proven.
Well, you are the one to tell us. I don't know better. But the fact of the matter is simply this. I remember, you
don't want him to
I'm
tell
not
us.
a man. In the same way, you see what he said. He's not a woman. The so-called circumcision is an invasion. It's an invasion of her physiology. But it's not just about her physiology. It's what happens to the woman. Those who are survivors, please note the word, survivors of female genital mutilation, apart from what is done to try and bring an intervention, because where it escalates to the challenges that lead to the very sad outcomes where a young girl now, because of FGM, has the mutilation of her private part that allows for a seepage, that brings about a seepage of feces, of urine, and she carries with her not just a stigma mentally, but physically. The other day, we just, in the FCT here, in collaboration with the Mandate Secretary for Health and Environment, Adit Olakwo and Fashewe, and the World Health Organization, I forget right now, but they had set up a new FGM center at Gwarinpa General Hospital.
I think it's Action Aid.
Action Aid, thank you. With Action Aid, that right now we have interventions for those operations, those surgical procedures to try and rearrange, let me put it, the mutilation to something that brings a lifestyle for these young people. Do you know, I had to talk to some young girls here in the FCT. Do you have anybody with FGM? And she said, no. I said, do you have anybody around you who has been smelling that they're hiding somewhere? She said, oh. And then she mentioned someone. They don't even know what to call it. Now, it's not just about the female genital mutilation. It's also about the fact that the violence against women, girl children, and everything has to do with securing environments as safe spaces. When you go to school, it's not just about bullying. You're in an environment where you are now a potential victim of kidnapping because you are part of a social attack by some activists against government, against a perception of reference within educational, religious reference, that this is haram when it comes to training a girl child in a particular way, in a particular context, in a particular environment, or something that you want to use. Now, that itself is another form. Just living in fear, just living in the terror that any moment you can be taking one chance in certain municipalities around us. I don't want to make a reference to any specific location, but where it is more prevalent. All of these, you talk about child marriage. Nigeria has the highest number of girls who marry before adulthood. I think the last underage marriage you're looking at, they say about 20 million girls are married before adulthood in Nigeria. I know we have the largest numbers and the largest population of people of African descent, of black people in the world. So without any question, our numbers would be significant. But what it also means is that as a reference for intervention, for domesticating these global and also our national gender policy acts, things to do with our child protection, the VAP acts and everything. Nigeria is core and center, is pivotal to driving strategic interventions to turn this from just being a narrative to a call to action. I say gender-based violence, in terms of its narrative and its conversation, does not need to be a violent conversation. It needs to be an advocacy. In the place of bringing advocacy, like we saw with the first gender and cultural norm summit hosted by Her Excellency, social norm summit, hosted by Her Excellency with the United Nations Population Fund on Tuesday, the language, the interaction, the conversation was about bringing our traditional leaders in the place, the thought leaders in religion, traditional leaders, and drivers of change through their own CEO interventions, persons like myself, commissioners, women commissioners from the states. And it wasn't just about men. Because you see, the GBV, even though we have that focus on women, a woman agenda is a human agenda. Whatever implicates a woman implicates the entire reference of human development where she is situated. If you bring intervention or investment to a woman, like Her Excellency the First Lady is doing through the Renewed Hope Initiative and the advocacy of a better life for every family. How? Through women working with women. It's a call to action that once you can bring this kind of conversation through women at a place of principal leadership, now bringing the advocacy not as a confrontation, but as a conversation. We bring it to our traditional leaders. We had the Emir of Shonga. He came in. He spoke to people. We had religious leaders on Tuesday being able to bring a communication of one faith.
Can we just put you on hold?
Yes.
Because otherwise you will finish 1 hour, almost 2 hour program in one, Well, so you want to take?
Okay, let me ask Asma Benzis Leo. She's tried to talked in elaborate terms about the FGM. But when we look at the numbers, what, in your view, are the most common forms of gender-based violence in Nigeria? Because if we begin from the higher numbers, then the chances are that you are going to, cut down the numbers quite much earlier than you will if you go to the lowest. I'm not sure what the numbers are now, if FGM ranks among the highest, but what are the numbers that you have?
Okay, thank you very much for this very important question. There are lots of types and forms of gender-based violence that occurs both in private and public spaces. When I talk of private spaces, maybe in the domestic sphere, and then maybe on the street or governance, it can happen anywhere and to anyone. Because sometimes when we talk about gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence, we always look at it from the bottom to the top. But I tell you that even the wealthiest women suffer gender-based violence. So it's not an exclusive issue that only targets the poorest of the poor. It is a general issue. And gender-based violence is not just targeted at women alone. Because when we talk about violence against women, that is targeted at women. But when we talk about gender-based violence, men and boys suffer gender-based violence, and women and girls equally suffer gender-based violence, depending on the context. So when you talk about forms, there is, let me just summarize it into 3 categories. We have the structural violence, and structural violence normally is being perpetrated by state authorities against the citizens. Structural violence is institutional. For instance, we have a decay in the health sector. We have decay in the educational sector. We have even issues with food insecurity. So the lack of responsibility on the part of leaders, state actors, to ensure the needs and priorities of citizens are met in itself is violence. So in Nigeria, every Nigerian, permit me to say, is suffering one form of violence or the other perpetrated by state actors. Because when human beings are not given the needed thing, basic, as much as the food, they need shelter and clothing, then that's violence. And another one is the physical one that we always talk about. The one that entails maybe
But when
rape.
you say, I'm sorry to cut in here. When you say not given the basics, food, shelter, clothing, who do you refer to? Is it the father of the house? Is it government now?
No,
Because it boils down sometimes to have, affordability, availability.
There are basics, and the responsibility of government is to provide the enabling environment. When a father in the house does not have any job, do you understand? How can that individual provide for his family? That is why some things have to be, there has to be some incentives, right?
So who is perpetrating the violence in this case?
That's why I say structural violence is mostly top to bottom approach, because it starts from leadership. And when I'm talking about leadership here, I'm talking about the government, the responsibility of government, right? And government, not just at the national level. We forget that there are 3 tiers of government. It's not, when we talk of government, everybody looks at the president, the executive at the center. No, what of the state government? What of the local government? In fact, it is more of the responsibility even at the local government. That's why I am happy with this autonomy for local government, because there has to be bottom-top approach for development. And what is development after all? It's just the basics. People having access to roads, water, health, sanitation, all these things in place. A common man does not desire so much. He is not interested in amassing wealth. But can the government, leaders, create enabling environment, the basis for poor people to survive? That's what I'm talking about when I talk of structural violence. And there is the physical violence, like I said, which can be perpetrated against an individual physically, like attacking a girl, committing rape, murder, homicide. All those things are what? Physical, something that you could see somebody, trying to endanger the life of another. And then there's another aspect which Auntie Dayo rightly puts, the cultural violence. And these are embedded in our cultural and social norms. And those kind of norms sometimes are unquestionable. You don't question them because it is translated from generation to generation. Our great-grandmother, like what she talks about, FGM. FGM is not men perpetrating violence against men. It is women who are the custodian of our culture that are perpetrating such acts. Who does the cutting? It's the women. Who does the even, what do you call it, when there's forced marriage in a family? If you look at it, it's not the men that come to give out those girls out. It's the women. So when we talk about this, it's general. And we have to begin to look at it holistically, not just bringing out one aspect and forgetting the other.
Yes, so, but it would appear that the summit recently convened by the Office of the First Lady and UNFPA had a focus on FGM, and you have hit on it very passionately. And I want to ask, because UNFPA has been on this campaign against FGM since 2008. In fact, for a very long time. I know it has, carried out quite a number of enlightenment and other. Well, what is triggering this renewed focus on FGM?
All right. So it was June when Her Excellency was of course, as the First Lady, attended the 11th of June 2024 FGM conference. Okay. And it was out of that Her Excellency's reflection brought up the conversation and a strategic direction that let's look at the advocacy of this. Why don't you, as UNFPA and my office, come up with this Gender and Social Norms Summit? Let's begin a conversation. You see, even though it's about FGM, it actually cuts across. It's now producing a multi-sectoral approach, because using her office and platform of the First Lady, she was able to bring in all the wives of executive governors, all principal CEOs in different agencies, women leadership across the country. And because after the opening and the presentations that were made, we now had those technical interventions. We had 2 technical interventions, that had to now take the discourse from identifying solutions and actions and also engaging communities to foster sustainable change. Now, working with the traditional rulers represented by His Royal Highness Emir Shonga, Dr. Haliru Yahaya, and we had two amazing interfaith mediators in the persons of Reverend James Movelwiye and Imam Dr. Mohammed Nurain Ashafa. What they were now able to communicate, the narrative, made the impact of this conversation one that helped us to see it's not just about pointing fingers, like you said. You missed out one level of government. I call it self-government. We ourselves are drivers of change. Now we need to be able to take what we've heard. This conversation now was triggered from that FGM, this summit. It now brought all of us together. Right now, the immediate assignment for me as the FCT Mandate Secretary for Women, for Children, is to engage my own 62 ward leaders from the Hakimis and their wives to the traditional birth attendants, to women leaders in those communities and youth leaders, because the conversation has to be at many levels of an intergenerational connection as we can get it. Bring it to the six area councils.
I'm sorry, what I'm actually asking you is, why is FGM now? Is it that the practice is becoming widespread?
Well,
is it affecting? But please, I would like to put you on hold.
No problem.
We've kept our guests from Jos for a while. Victor, you want to go?
Yeah, Dr. Dial, if you can hear me, I just wanted to find out, because the numbers that we have out there does not suggest that the issue of gender-based violence is going down. It actually suggests that, it's on the increase. So do you see a policy issue here? Is there any way that policy intervention can help to drop the numbers, in your opinion?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I want to join my previous contributors, Dr. Leo Benzis and the Mandate Secretary, to say that yes, actually, GBV is actually on the increase, but we don't really lack laws. Permit me to mention a few of the laws that are directed at preventing GBV in Nigeria, and I think the very famous one, which is still very current, is the VAP Act, which is the Violence Against Persons Provision Act. We also have the Criminal Code in Southern Nigeria and the Penal Code in Northern Nigeria. We have the Child's Rights Act. We have the Trafficking in Persons Provision Enforcement and Administration Act of 2015. We also have NAPTIF, the National Gender Policy, the Sexual Harassment in Tertiary Education Institutional Prohibition Act of 2021, I think. And also we have several state-level domestic laws aimed at addressing violence against persons in either our tertiary institutions or in our workplaces, or whether it is emotional violence or cultural violence or sexual exploitation and trafficking, or online or technology facilitated violence, because this violence become in different forms. And until we understand them, we will not handle them. So compartmentalizing the forms of violence becomes very key, because when you're dealing with sexual violence, you need to know the right forms of interventions to handle that. When you're dealing with emotional and psychological violence, which is not sometimes too very often open for people to know it exists, but it's very prevalent, you will not know how to intervene. If it is cultural and traditional violence, you need to understand how that operates so you can know how to intervene. And then sexual exploitation and trafficking. So interventions vary according to the types of violence that you find in society. Like I said, we have numerous laws and policies both at the national and subnational level to assist in the prevention of gender-based violence. Basically, what I see as a gap in terms of policy and implementation is what is happening at the local levels, at the local government levels, as Dr. Benzis mentioned earlier. You see, the states have the laws. They've adopted some of these laws from the national laws. But then what is happening at the local government councils where our traditional rulers reside, where women who are at the age, like those who are poor, subject to exploitation, etc., exist. The faces of these laws are not oftentimes present. If you move also to our work institutions, where you're having sexual harassment or institutional violence this time around, what is there in place to protect people from being exploited? I mentioned the law to protect our students on campus, which is the Sexual Harassment in Tertiary Educational Institution Prohibition Act. How many institutions have produced sexual harassment policies in line with this act? So you're going to be having national laws, you have state laws, but trickling it down to the nitty-gritty spaces and institutions sometimes become lacking. And if you look at even the implementation where you have SAC centers, you have people working on GBV, people are still working in silos. I just had the privilege of somebody sending me a link, even as a gender expert and professional, that there's a summit happening on UNFPA on GBV. So I had to ask for the document to read. So you see that there's this kind of approach that everybody wants to shine alone, and it affects the implementation of GBV. I've said that in many places, and it is subject to interrogation. You know, until we coordinate this both at the national, both at the local and the peri-urban areas, including the hard-to-reach local areas, we are not going to move, and that's why you continue to see a hike. Recently in Plateau, you continue to see cases of child trafficking. The Commissioner for Women Affairs intercepted a lot of our girls who have been trafficked within even the states, and then those who are taken outside as house helps somewhere within Nigeria. And it's because these things are not coordinated, so people are working in silos. Of course, I'm aware that there's a dashboard where cases are reported, but when you report the cases, we are counting numbers. What are we doing about the numbers that are being reported? And I think these are the kind of discussions we should begin to have. How do we ensure we prevent these things from going up and make sure they go down? People are not even talking about toxic masculinity. While I agree, center of the implementation of some of these harmful acts, toxic masculinity exists in the sense that we support dangerous ideas of maleness. You know, so sometimes these dangerous ideas of maleness comes with a lot of force, it comes with implementation of violence, etc. It's high time we begin to educate both men and women to begin to think about controlling behaviors, maybe a little bit more of emotional intelligence. That the fact that you're male or you're female or you're in position of power doesn't mean that you can exploit people you are working over or load yourself over them. Because when you're talking about violence, it might not necessarily be very harmful. And that's why I talked about the psychological, emotional violence, where you exploit your girls, you exploit your women, and you render them completely useless, even when you're not touching them with your hands. But then at some point, completely, they have lost their sense of identity and voice. That is a very serious form of violence, and is related to many other forms of violence. Because once you render a woman or a girl child unable to voice out and have a say on what she wants or how she wants to control her body, then you can easily exploit her physically and otherwise. Thank you.
Stay with you before we come back to the studio. And I would like us to take the FGM, because the NFPA, you know, I listened to the lady from the NFPA during the summit, and she was very strong on the, you know, female genital mutilation. And I'd like us to talk about it just before we delve into the other aspects of GBV. Professor Sophie Oluwole of blessed memory, you know, each time she discussed this matter, would always tell you that this is a method. In fact, she called it our own, traditional family health planning method. That's what she would call it. And she would tell you that this is a, practice that has been carried on for so many years by our mothers and our grandmothers, and it appeared to be working for them. So my question will be, why have we started talk about this now? Because in spite of the advocacies over the years against FGM, a number of states in different parts of the country, this practice is still going on. Why are we talking about it now, and what is still motivating those who practice FGM?
Okay. Well, let me come in here. I think that FGM comes with a lot of complications. It's not just about the physical cutting. It comes with a lot of health implications. It comes with even risks at childbirth. It comes with pains. It comes with infections, etc. Compared to if you're to mutilate a male child, which is what some people will compare it to circumcision. But if you look at the risks associated with FGM, you know that it is harmful practice, because that's not about cutting off any foreskin, and in worst cases, even death. And so research have shown that communities in the past get some forms of celebrations and forms of praises or social pressure that comes with female genital mutilation. Celebrations in the sense that if your child is going to be mutilated, there's some form of celebrations. People bring gifts, people will come to support, people tell you that, oh, now you have done the right thing. You are trying to protect the culture by ensuring that women do not become promiscuous. So the idea about female genital mutilation, it's about controlling the female body and some form of purity assumptions that don't even exist. Despite pressure from advocates, health institutions to tell people that no, this doesn't work. I had a friend I met somewhere in the US some years back who had experienced mutilation, but she's a Senegalese. And she told me that she looked forward to FGM at that time because her mother over time groomed her. So they were buying clothes and keeping her wrappers. And so when they gather a few of them for the ceremony, when you are mutilated, you are celebrated, you are encouraged and told you are a woman. So some fake things, some very dangerous perceptions about the cleanliness that comes with mutilation. But I tell you, there is nothing good about FGM, and it should be discouraged because it is very harmful, even for the physical well-being of those who have been mutilated. And like I said, the future impact that affects them in terms of bleeding, in terms of complications during childbirth.
Handling, Dr. Dyer, is this not a matter of handling? Because those who carry out these incisions are supposed to be traditionally equipped. Is this not all a matter of, because
it's not a matter of handling. That place should not be handled that way. Our feminine genitals were not created to be mutilated. They were not created to be tampered with, to be invasively, in any way, tampered with to give them a new presentation. This is not a makeup job that you are just putting foundation and wiping off in the evening. This is something that they go on for the rest of their lives to carry. They go on as survivors. Like, I didn't even realize how significant the negative impact of this. I'll be sincere with you. I didn't even understand FGM as such a significant reference of female violation until over time, through events, programs, I've been exposed, I've received an education and an understanding. And you're asking why now? How now? The why now and how now is that we've evolved even as a society in the place of understanding ourselves and in the place of having a voice. The UNFPA program, in collaboration with Her Excellency, the First Lady, talked about voices for change. We all need to come together as a collective voice. We heard Dr. Dial talking about the fact that we are working as silos. We need to come together. We need to know, I have to be with you. We have to work together to make this, like we were just talking before sitting in the studio, that we are a family. We are a tribe. We are not just a women's liberation movement. No, I believe that women, once you have the mindset, you are liberated. But we must be able, we're a women advocacy intervention. And therefore, FGM, the fact that it's come to the table as a front burner discussion is because the people who have been the victims of this have been unable to speak out. For you to speak out is to shame your family, is to shame yourself. The day I realized this was a significant cultural issue that had no borders was when I was attending the CSW, and I found out that families in the United States of America, our own African families, our own Nigerian families, please, and like you said, they were not grassrooters from some rural community. No, these are daughters of professors, Nigerian professors, who in America are carrying out female circumcision for their children. Why? Because they said when they die, they will not be buried at home. There's a cultural implication that a woman would not be buried in her place of her earth of birth once she has not carried out that circumcision. I'm like, there are different things. So it's like what we call a norm isn't just happening at home. It has transcended the borders. When a fully enlightened professor, somebody of ambassadorial representation, with all of that enlightenment, would still secretly take their daughter somewhere in America, because it must not be heard that you're doing that.
For circumcision.
And they conduct a mutilation in the name of a traditional rite of celebration. And then the girls cannot speak out. They cannot tell you this is what has happened to them. Now, if it has come to the fore that we are now bringing it out as a conversation, as a discussion, it is for intervention. We have all the policies. Nigeria has all the policies, all the laws. What we have not done is the call to action. Where are the actors? Where is the work being domesticated? I must, at the end of my assignment, I am 10 months into this, when I'm giving account in my 1-year report, I must give account of how it is that I have domesticated. I have taken the VAP Act. I have taken the
sit-down laws,
all of the sit-down. I must become accountable to the observing public, to my principals, to my place of assignment. I'm not doing this as an activist. I'm doing this carrying through the advocacy, like we've heard it, that now needs to be properly domesticated. Now understanding, I must come up with a strategy that brings together the resources that we have in terms of the human resource that can speak to this, direct this, re-strategize it, and I must be accountable.
You know,
62 words. I must tell you, we have done this concerning
we need to yes, for the message.
Yes.
For the message to really flow down, you know, to those that should hear it. We must understand the different dimensions, you know, the different perspectives that people bring in when you're having a conversation on FGM. And that's why I'm just going to ask, you know, and Dr. Smile, you may want to take it up again. Because when, I don't know if you, and indeed, many of our generation, women generation, would have come under the cut, under FGM. I mean, our generation, yes. So I'm wondering, is it relatable that the present female generation are more sexually active because, they didn't go through the knife, and therefore, I don't know. Yes.
This is really funny.
No, it's not funny because that's
It's an assumption.
yes.
So to say. It's an
It
assumption.
is the belief. It's not
error.
assumption. Yes.
It's an
Yes.
error and a negative perception and a narrative that has been sold out and made people to believe. Let me give you cite an instance for you. I was in Senegal for 3 weeks rather, and there is an organization headed by an American who has been in Senegal for over 35 years. She founded that organization, and the focus of that organization is to also work with locals on how they can alleviate or rather stop the act of FGM. But you know what?
But Gambia is reversing its own laws, which is why
that is political. Let's not bring Gambia because Gambia issue with FGM is political.
Very political.
For the sake of this analogy I'm bringing, that because it's like a fact-finding mission or an exchange I wanted to undertake under a project. I was part of the World Bank project. We went there sponsored by the bank. And what we discovered is that the people, because they don't see it, in Senegal you don't talk about it as FGM. It is, to them, they say it is not a mutilation. That you are undermining their cultural beliefs and system, and it is not right. So they call it cutting. So in Senegal, when you're having a conversation at this level, you call it female genital cutting. Because they say when you say mutilation, it's destroying the entire thing, and that's not what they do. To them, it's a thing of honor. That every girl, has been established by Auntie Dayo and my colleague Blanc. You understand? For us in Nigeria too, my friend, it happens that we're working on the same issue. And she, for the first time, she confided in me. She said, "Yes, I've been caught." And in my locality, the time we were caught,
most of us, most
they
of our
used,
generations,
just listen, that they use, what do you call it? The shell of a snail to cut them. So I was just imagining how you could use a shell of a snail to cut a child, but that without that, no family can survive. It has both spiritual implication. They said that maybe your great-grandparent or somebody will die. They put fear in you, and they pick it up, and they feel they're doing the family honor by presenting their bodies to be cut. So, Auntie Zaya said, it's a time of celebration. We need to do something very drastic before I come to the issue of maybe our generation comparison.
All right.
Transgenerational impact. For us, there's a huge gap, and that has to do with knowledge gap. We didn't understand the health implication. We thought we were doing ourselves and our parents and our generation a favor. This generation understands better. Anything you need to do, they question it. You cannot just bring a child. If it is 5 years old, you say you want to cut her. The child will ask you, "Mommy, why do you want to cut me? Mommy, I cannot do it." And they stand by their words. We didn't have that privilege of opposing or disrupting patriarchy or disrupting our social and cultural norms. That was why many of us were victims or survivors, so to say. But as it is today, we can't. Yeah, please go ahead.
Let's allow the man to speak. Let's allow the man to speak out, so that we can. Because don't let it be that we have gender marginalized him. Please,
I'm thinking that we have made it all about female genital mutilation.
No, but that's
a serious issue, but it is not the only form of gender-based violence. We are taking this at the expense of the other issues, and that's why, because you have gone into politics, like you said in Gambia, that it's political, Dr. Plansat, if there is an implication, is there power, the impact of power dynamics in all of this? And I'm talking about, on a general note, gender-based violence. Does power have anything to do with it, power play in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would answer your question, but I'll still start from the FGM stuff. So then I flow from there. Now you see, deeply ingrained cultural, social, and economic factors come to play when you're discussing GBV. You know, like I mentioned earlier when discussing the various types of gender-based violence, they are all linked to our culture, our social values, economic factors, etc. You see, FGM strives because people believe that in those communities that they practice it, they believe that it is a rite of passage into womanhood, you know, and they believe that it sits within the notions of purity, modesty, and social acceptance. So people get their daughters mutilated because they want that social acceptance, just as the mandate secretary mentioned, that people will hide and go and do, even professors, because they want their daughters to be buried when they die. So these are deeply ingrained cultural issues. And because they are also social issues, people are looking for acceptance. So people want to promote the fact that, oh, I've also put my daughters in that space, not minding the risks they are exposing their daughters to. So they are more concerned about issues of purity, issues of modesty, issue of social acceptance. And then afterwards, people believe that it is about ensuring chastity and also fidelity after marriage. And so social pleasure plays very key role. When you talk about even psychological violence, as I mentioned earlier, where you see toxic masculinity coming to play, that men wouldn't want to be soft, even when on their own. Some men are very soft. And as a matter of fact, research has shown that there are thousands of men who are tired of being hard and behaving according to the rules of their customs. You know, by nature, they are soft-spoken. They are soft human beings. They want to treat the other gender softly. But because societal pressure expects them to be masculine, maleness, to be very hard, they found themselves going through those kinds of pressures because of fear of ostracisms, or they want to be socially accepted. So they practice certain things. So the perpetuation of sexual violence is rooted deeply in economic issues and traditional issues. And I want to say a little bit to the extent that maybe religion, and I'm not sure I want to go into that areas. The older generation of our parents entrenched and supported certain practices, and they passed it over. These things might not be written, but then there are practices that you grow and you see happening, and unconsciously you're also passing it to the next generation. So challenging these kinds of social networks of behaviors or acceptance that have become part of our society becomes very, very important. And it's because of the existence of these cultural beliefs, value systems, social acceptability, etc. It becomes very, very challenging to even implement all the laws we have listed are in existence, because people are aware that when you're trying to implement, you face a lot of cultural resistance. And sometimes when you want to implement, you also don't have the adequate resources. Imagine you take people to SAC centers, for example. Who runs these SAC centers? Most of these SAC centers are privately.
I'm sorry. We'll have to put you on hold at the moment because we have to take a break to pay some bills. And when we return, we'll get... All right, thanks for staying with us. This is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And as we go into the very last stretch of this program, let me get to Dr. Asma Benzi's Leo. All of you, everybody seems to want to. I think my voice is drowned here when it comes to. Everybody wants to talk about the FGM, right? Everybody wants to talk about the FGM. I just wanted that we also give some time, especially as the program is gradually coming to an end. We give some time to other forms of, gender-based violence, and I want to believe that the greater numbers today may not come from FGM if we talk about gender-based violence, I stand to be corrected. And that's why I wanted us to give some time, I still do, to some other aspects of gender-based violence. And what would you say they are? Yes, we've talked a lot about FGM. We will still talk about it, in the course of the program. But where are the numbers concentrated in your work? What have you found?
I think specifically sexual and gender-based violence, rape, for now, because we call it the shadow pandemic. If you remember during the COVID, the lockdown, a lot of women and girls were raped within their communities, within their homes, which ordinarily would have been a safe space for them. But ultimately, it became a major threat to their lives and well-being. So rape is on the increase, right? And there are other, those that are not visible, intangible, we can't see them, but we normally talk about them. And they exist. Widowhood right. Because it's not something that people practice outwardly, so it is always in the cupboard. When a man dies, it's always the woman that kills the man. We hardly hear a man becoming a victim of a wife dying. It's only when the man dies that you know that there's culture, right? A woman is made to even drink water. In some cultures, the dead body will be washed and then to prove her innocence.
To date?
To date. Yeah, in many communities. That's what I'm telling you. It's done covertly. The family, in secrecy. The family always covers that, and they do it. And who are those? I always say, this conversation has to be women to women, men to women. Women ensure, old women in the community will come and say, let her prove her innocence. They'll be the one to wash their body, bring it for you to drink, keep you with the dead body, right? Then this inheritance right is another issue we are not talking about. Your father, maybe he has given birth to you, your parents, let me not use father, because women to leave inheritance for their children. And at the end of the day, they die. And relatives, we call them thieves. Thieves, relatives, they come to steal and to just hijack whatever is left for the children. Especially the girl child. They said, oh, she's a girl. She is not entitled to inheritance. And so the wheel goes round and round, except for some few states in Nigeria who have made it a law specifically to uphold this inheritance right for women and girls. Another aspect is the issue of forced marriages. We can't talk about, early marriage, forced marriage, they are connected. Because once a girl has not reached the age of consent, which is 18, you can't give her out for marriage because she's still a child. But that's another thing for another day, because some cultures or some regions will tell you, no, a child, as long as you have breasts and you can menstruate, or your body, all this physiological whatever development in a woman, then you are ripe for marriage. But in itself, that is the hardest, lies that people have told themselves. A child is always a child. Even if she comes up fully grown, the moment she opens her mouth to talk, you differentiate her from an adult woman.
Because that's determined by age, right?
Yeah, it's determined by age and experience also. And that is why even the FGM we are talking about, and also VVF, when you expose a child, because it has a triple-down effect, from early and forced marriage to the health implication that goes round, not just for her, but a child cannot nurture another child. You force her into bringing into the world another child.
And even the process of carrying
9 months, and then when she gives birth to she doesn't even know how to take care of the child. Right. Malnutrition, all these childhood diseases, infant mortality increases, maternal mortality and infant morbidity, they call it, is on the rise. Why? Because we send, and it is particular to certain regions in Nigeria. Why? Because you marry your girls early, and so you have to live with this health and demographic, whatever we call it, to your disadvantage. And it doesn't help us as a people. We have to take responsibility. We also have to create awareness within our communities that these are the dangers. Nobody is saying you shouldn't marry off your child, because, of course, it's a thing of joy to see girls being married. Every human being that gives birth, even if you've not given birth to a girl child like me, I will also always want to see my sisters getting married, my neighbors getting married. So it's a thing of joy. In Africa, we converge to celebrate. But on the flip side of it, too, when we look at the implication of those that are not ready, physically, mentally, physiologically, emotionally, you're not, education. Marriage comes with a lot of baggage. And most of the times, if the marriage is between same generation, the harm will be less. But
That-
when you are forced to marry somebody that is old enough to be your grandfather in the name of marriage, what do we say about
that's
this?
as you rightly observed, the issue of forced child marriage is a very complex one for us. And while some states have domesticated the laws against it, others are yet to do that. And it's part of the reasons why even the gender bill, has yet to pass.
Exactly.
Yes. So, sorry, Victor. I know
The
where you're
gender
going.
bill,
Yes.
you want to link the gender bill to this?
No,
I'm
no,
not sure.
It's very important. Yeah.
No.
To
It's linked to
everything.
everything.
You know,
Yes. Sorry, I'm going to ask you because we are stretching down home now. So let's begin to look at frameworks, for solutions. And the SDG, Go 5, it's on gender, equality. And there's also the framework for solutions. WHO is giving us respect framework and providing support.
Exactly.
Now, what is the framework that the Office of the First Lady is providing in terms of, strengthening skills and empowerment for survivors of GBV?
well, I believe that as the RHI, that's Renewed Hope Initiative coordinator, the advocacy of the First Lady for all of these interventions is a very simple strategy. It is to reach every family in every community through the intervention of the Office of the First Lady on different referenced expressions of renewed hope, health. Today, the First Lady is going to be kicking off the Renewed Hope Initiative project to accelerate birth registration at scale in Nigeria. Why? Because all over Nigeria, they have found out that there are no, people don't have data of birth. Now, you arrive not just as a baby, you arrive as a critical reference and demographic, a number that needs intervention, funding from primary health care to education to socialization in the place of development. Curriculums have to be built around you. All of these strategies that bring intervention. So for her, it's about reaching every family, health, education, working through cultural advocacy. The First Lady does not define gender in terms of the equality reference quotient, but gender equity, creating gender opportunity. And why? Because the language and the tone in which, the language and the tone with which we need, the language and the tone with which we need to communicate the impact of human development. Excellency says, I'm not here to build for buildings, for capital projects that build, buildings, come and commission a building. No, it's for lives. How are you feeding the belly? And take, for instance, we're talking about feeding the belly. Security is no security without food security. And that is why her Every Home a Garden competition isn't so much about a woman somewhere across the 36 states and the capital winning 20 million naira. 20 million naira is just money. But the impact of this program, getting women to cultivate gardens at home, not just for ornamental beautification, but to feed the family and feed the neighborhood and see what it's doing. Every Home a Garden, grow your vegetables. Cultivate around you the tomato that everybody is angry is so expensive in the market. Is not expensive from your garden.
But how does it relate? How does it relate with?
Let me explain. How does it relate with the issue of gender-based violence? Very simple. We always hear it said that a hungry man is an angry man. When you are able to provide food, you are able to provide a sustenance. This intervention at home, a lot of pressure on men by women, is the fact that he's not providing, he's an infidel, I'm a Christian. You hear it so easily and quickly. A man who cannot provide for his family is worse than an infidel. My money is my money. My husband must give me money. in these times, it's not even about these times, the culture of respect one-on-one, that's why I said the government that is self-government, self-governance, the mind of a woman that is taking money for herself just for her weave-on, her makeup, her ashwebi and all that, but it is the man who must be the one providing for the school fees, for the house rent, for everything. This is what has put pressure on a man to bring reactions to the woman. And then we don't see this. We don't see this as a provocation. And at the end of the day, that provocation, because I remember going on a program and somebody said to me, you know, like, there you are going with that argument for the men. And I was a bit thrown off, you know, like, just because I mentioned that I'm a counselor. I counsel young people. I'm privileged to counsel
older people.
In terms of couples. Thank you. And one of the areas, you see this economic thing. If we start going, that's another norm, religious norm, that it is just the man that is to be providing, and the woman makes no provision. We were talking about growing food at home. Don't just cook the food that you're waiting for your husband to give you money that you're going to use to cook. Grow at home in sacks, on the wall, whatever it is. Do something that brings food. When you do that, bring something to the belly of everyone at home. And you have more than enough to share.
I like where you are now.
Why? Because as a man.
I like where you are now.
Because
and that's why
toxic masculinity. We must also deal with toxic femininity.
So that
when women accuse and provoke. I'm a woman, I'm not saying we don't.
Dr. Benjamin, now, so that we don't leave our viewers with, the impression that once you talk about gender-based violence, you are talking about the female gender. Now, let me ask Dr. Plangsat, who has joined us in Jos, what are those common areas that the men also experience violence? You know, when you say gender-based violence, it's very easy to say, oh, gender-based violence, then we are talking about women anyway. Perhaps that's why we have 3 women on set and no man, but it's okay.
You know, man.
but it's okay. So what areas do you see where the men, get the shorter end of the stick in this regard?
Well, thank you very much. If you remembered in my opening statement, I talked about the different forms of violence, because that was the entry point I was trying to come from. You see, economic violence affects both men and women, because women might remain in toxic relationships and with their abusers because they're economically dependent. And also women can also condition men to feel they have to provide at all costs, even when they are unable to. I think the mandate secretary talked about that a bit when she was trying to explain promoting dependence and self-sustenance for women who go into many other ventures to provide for the family, to reduce the kind of pressure that comes with the violence people face. Psychological violence, I remember the discussion with some of my students when we were discussing these GBV issues, and they complained seriously about this psychological violence. According to them, emotional and psychological violence, where you link your provisions, your affections to economical issues, to provision, and so you subject the provider of those economic services to some emotional and psychological violence. So men face a lot of those kinds of violence. We're talking about in terms of percentage. Of course, when you put everything, data speaks. In terms of percentage, we have more women and girls facing gender-based violence compared to boys and men, basically because of the culture that is deeply rooted, maybe the power dynamics within our society that makes it looks easy to justify male dominance, leading to the normalization of violence on women and girls compared to the normalization of violence on boys and men. men have been coming out to talk about the violence they face. But you see, these social norms and social stigma affects them the most. Maybe they will talk about the kinds of violence they face in drinking, sports, and joints. They will not want to come out openly to say, oh, this is it, I'm affected in my household, this is how my household is treating me. While it's easy for women and girls to talk about that because, of course, we have more spaces where we interact, community meetings, markets, you can talk about that. Men come for talk about the kinds of violence they face. We have already spaced them as the perpetrators of these, probably because data shows that, yes, in terms of perpetrators, we have more men perpetrating violence than women. But there is a substantial number of men, like I said, social norms affect their ability to speak out, even when they are facing those kinds of violence. They face it more in terms of economic violence, psychological violence, social violence. A few of them face some form of sexual harassment. But in terms of reportage, you have more women coming out to report freely than men. So maybe that's another area. I don't know, maybe the mandate secretary and her team, as they're looking into it, would expand. See if what we're actually talking about in terms of prevalence is not actually existence. But for now, data shows that more women face violence compared to men. There are also a lot of men who would want to but they are not able to because of the social pressure, wanting to be accepted, wanting to belong, and also because of the existence of what I referred earlier, toxic masculinity. They want a maleness in them. So they are not able to challenge even the existence of norms that are impacting on them negatively. Thank you.
Get back to Dr. Asmao. Quickly in 60 seconds so that Dr. Dyer can also conclude. Now that, the women in leadership, via the Office of the First Lady is taking up this renewed, responsibility to reform, this area, this challenge, what are your perspectives? What do you think can be done now? What, going forward?
My last one will be about collaboration. No one individual, no one system or institution can have it all. It has to be a collective responsibility on the part of everyone, both at the local level, state, and even at the national level. We need to work together. We need to ensure that the fight for gender-based violence is a fight to finish. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Dyer, what's the posture of the Office of the First Lady towards this now?
I believe it's a posture that the UN Women has given everyone in collaboration with Ford Foundation, RESPECT, respect. It's a fact that with the collaboration, as she has given this first gender, and social norms summit, the first position for a first conversation that we all now need to domesticate. And through UN Women, the RESPECT very simply states that 1, the relationship strengthening, E, empowerment of women, S, services ensure that providing prevention and response and all of that recovery resilience, P, poverty reduced, that's poverty reduced action and interventions, E, environments made safe, safe schools, safe communities, all of that, C, child and adolescent abuse prevented, and T, transformed attitudes, beliefs, and norms. We're talking about positive masculinity, positive femininity, and I would like to say a woman agenda does not exclude men in the agenda. When I came into the mandate, they said, oh, women again, how about men? I said, they say women too. So I said women and women number 2. We want to be able to engage you. We have cases in our office that have escalated to us from men. Men who have found out they are not fathers of the children, that women are forcing them to pay school fees and do what, it traumatizes them. Indeed. Men who are so traumatized, they're in the gardens drinking beer because they are miserable. And in this, this is humorous but real. A man Men got up to protect a man in an estate in Abuja that was being abused by his wife every night.
And that's why
I now said you could get up for a man who was being abused. When last did you get up for a woman
Dr.
who
Adedayo,
was being abused?
I think I have
I
found,
hereby rest my master.
I think I have found my voice.
May I also, somebody was whispering to me that I need to see a therapist after being oppressed by women on set this morning.
All right.
And I'll take that up. I think I'll consider that. Dr. Adedayo Benjamin Slani, Mandate Secretary, FCT Women and Children Secretariat, we appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
Let me also thank Dr. Asmao Benzis Leo, Gender and Development Expert. It's always a pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria. And finally, but not by the least by any means, let me thank Dr. Dail Plangsat, a gender specialist and policy and development analyst. She's also the immediate past director of the Center for Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Jos and currently Deputy Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Jos. Thank you very much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria and for, of course, giving me that voice to tell me that there are men like me that are being oppressed. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's the program. We'll just leave it here. A very pleasant place to leave the conversation. Thanks for watching. I'm Victor as well. We'll see you again tomorrow.
You know, Victor, all that we've said today reminds me of George Benson's song. If I knew back then what I know now, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
All right. Don't forget your name.